Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much, Greg. And thank you all for joining me today, whatever time of the day it is for you here. I'm on the East Coast, so it's 4:01 p.m. Eastern, but I know many of you all may be in Mountain Time or maybe even Central Time. So good day, everybody. I'm so glad to have this opportunity to be with you today, but just a really quick introduction before we launch into the presentation and hopefully a bit of discussion. Um, Although this is a lurking session, so you are welcome to lurk as well. My name is Stephanie Foote, or Steph as I often go by, and I work at the Gardner Institute, which is a nonprofit organization. And I have a position there that involves many different types of roles and responsibilities, but one of the things that I get to do is to work closely with faculty in course redesign. And then I'm also a lecturer at Stony Brook University, a longtime lecturer. Before I came to the Gardner Institute several years ago, I was a full-time faculty member. So a lot of what I'll be talking about today in this session really focuses on research that I've been involved in that's independent of the work that I do at the Gardner Institute and is more reflective of what I'm doing in my own professional practice. So things that I've begun to incorporate and have done research on in the courses that I teach at Stony Brook. So I'll talk more about that in just a few moments, but I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll begin. I do want to let you all know that I would welcome your questions and comments throughout the presentation. So feel free to post in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute or come on camera, I think you can do that as well. I would love to hear from you all. There will also be some dedicated time at the end of the session for some discussion and questions. So feel free again to interrupt. You're not interrupting, but feel free to interject at any point during the presentation or wait until the end if you prefer to do that. So the goals that I have for us today, hopefully we will be able to do a little bit of learning together, some reflection, and share as we're comfortable. And at the end of the session, I hope that you'll see how you might use the online engagement framework and some different approaches to reflection to engage in your own reflective practice. And this can be applied in online and blended courses, but if anyone is teaching on the ground, it could be applied in that setting as well. But these are frameworks that are largely, they've been largely influenced by research on and involving online education, but certainly, again, they could be applied in an on-the-ground setting as well. The QR code in the right-hand side will take you to a resource wakelet that I put together with a copy of the presentation slides and also with a handout that I've created that includes reflective questions and links to the open source readings that I will refer to that have really been influential in sort of the thinking around the presentation. So I put the link to the wakelet as well in the chat, but you're welcome to use the QR code or the link, whatever you prefer. So I thought we would start really briefly with an introduction to reflection in online teaching and learning. And really the emphasis here is reflection in our online teaching. And I know that probably all of us who've been involved in online teaching, I myself have been involved in it. And I say this, it's going to date me since about 2006. But I know that all of us probably are engaged in some form of reflection or reflective practice, or maybe many forms of reflective practice. But I know for myself as an online educator, even someone who was teaching online from the very beginning, that although I've engaged in reflective practice, I didn't always follow sort of a formula or format. I was pretty sort of loose with my reflection. And so one of the things that I have aspired to do in the last few years as I've been involved in more research in online teaching is to really think deeply about how I could use some more structure in my own reflection. And it's helped me really to make a lot of significant changes and to make more changes in the moment. And that's really what the quotes here speak to. So in this passage that you'll see on the screen, I'm asking you to think about why this is important in our online teaching. And, here we often say that there's not sufficient time or space to engage in reflection in ways that are more formalized. But without that structure, I found myself that I was, affirming I wasn't, I was just sort of affirming my beliefs. I wasn't challenging myself. I wasn't gathering evidence. And I wasn't being as flexible in terms of my course changes as I really wanted to be, because my philosophy is to try to meet my students where they are. I don't want to make my workload such that I can't do a good job. But at the same time, I really want to be responsive to what I can in terms of my students' learning needs. So it really gave me pause as I was engaged in this research and thinking about how I could do more than just, reflecting in a hall of mirrors. So using a framework or a series of frameworks to really do this double loop learning that involves reflection on action and in action. So challenging myself to be more metacognitive in my own teaching process. So to actually practice the kinds of things that I ask my students to do, to be flexible, to collect evidence, to try new things, and to then gather more evidence to see whether or not they're working. So really that was the inspiration behind it. So I decided to, in my own research and in my professional practice, engage in more guided reflection. So this is a process where I'm using more structure and in a systematic way, using a series of questions or prompts. And in the Wakelet that I shared, and I'm going to reshare it because I know there's some folks who have just joined us and some who are literally just joining us now. I have in there a series of reflective questions, and we'll talk through them in just a few moments that are associated with an online engagement framework. These sorts of structured questions and prompts have helped me tremendously as I've engaged in my own reflective practice because they've given me something to literally respond to rather than, again, just, kind of forming questions and responses in my head and going with what I felt like was happening in the course or what I needed to do. I've really begun to be more structured and thoughtful in the process. Another sort of byproduct of this, I mentioned being more metacognitive in my own teaching and learning, is that, when we use guided reflection, whether you use what I'm sharing with you all today or use other forms of guided reflection, is that we develop our own self-awareness and our own self-regulation. So when we begin to see what's happening and we're gathering evidence in a more systematic way, then we can be metacognitive. We're reflecting on our practice and we can be more responsive in the moment, which again is what we often assume or expect our students to do. So it helps us ultimately sometimes as we're trying to manage time and tasks and make, informed decisions rather than just changing something for the sake of changing it or not changing it and waiting until the next semester. So there are a lot of frameworks that we could use to guide reflection. But the one that I'm referring to in this presentation is one that actually I wasn't familiar with until I started doing this research about 5 years ago with the team that created the online engagement framework. And it's called John's Model of Reflection. And the reason that I'm using this particular model, and I'll show it to you in just a moment, is because it lends itself well to the online engagement framework and to the integration of the elements. So hopefully you can see that as I introduce you as well to the online engagement framework. But I'll then present to you some questions to show you how it can be sort of used in concert with one another. So guided reflection has been important to me, and I think moving forward, having more structure ultimately is really what's at the heart of this. But again, this model and then the framework that I'll share with you in just a moment have been foundational in that guided reflection process. So this is John's model. It's a very simple one, and it is not dissimilar from other models of reflection or even critical thinking or inquiry that are out there. But it is designed such that I think it lends itself again to the application of the online engagement framework elements, which I'll share in just a few moments. So at the beginning, you can see here, you describe the experience. And again, this is something often that we invite our students to do when they're engaged in the learning process. We want them to be able to describe what we're asking them to do. So as instructors, it's helpful sometimes for us to describe what we're experiencing and to commit to that. So I know that, I may have sort of a thought or idea in my head, but as I'm going through my guided reflection process at different intervals, I'm taking a few notes on how I feel and what the experience for me is like in that moment. And then I'm engaged in reflection using prompts that I'll share in a moment. I'm looking at the factors that are influencing how I'm feeling. So are there things that are happening or not happening in my class? Are students engaged? Do they appear to be disengaged? Are there other things that are influencing the situation? So all of that has to be taken into account because as I consider course changes, I want to be very mindful in what I'm doing, both in the moment and longer term as I'm thinking through potential course changes. I'm also thinking about the things that I have done up until this point, the feedback, the responses, and John's has this next sort of step in this process or in this model that invites us to think about, whether or not we could have dealt with the situation better, the experience better. So are there things that are happening that I could have mitigated at the beginning that could have addressed this? So for example, several years ago, I found that students had a number of questions about a couple of assignments in one of the courses that I teach, a student development theory course that I teach. And so I went back to the assignments and tweaked some of the language and, it helped a bit with the questions. But then I decided that longer term, I really wanted to address this and to make sure that students didn't have other unanswered questions or sort of gray areas about any of the assignments or activities. So I decided I would take a tilt approach, transparency in learning and teaching, which comes from the work of Winklemas. And I decided to apply that to all of the assignments and activities in my courses that I teach. And so literally every one of them is introduced with a task, purpose, and then the criteria for success. And I found that by taking that tilt approach, that it greatly reduced the number of questions that I got about assignments or activities. So when I went back to this process, to this model, that was the way that I could have dealt with it better by coming up with this sort of an approach that I could apply not only to an assignment or the assignments in my class, but literally to every assignment and activity. And it made a long-standing transformation in terms of students' engagement because they knew what was expected of them. And ultimately, the product that they were creating, the work was so much better because it was so much more clear to them. And it helped me too as an instructor because I needed to reduce jargon and noise that was probably contributing to some of the cognitive overload my students may have felt. And then lastly, in this learning part of the model, I'm still focusing on improvement. So I'm learning about how I could make a change or changes and what might result from that experience. I'm exploring my current feelings. So I'm learning too about myself as I'm making these changes and thoughts about how my experience overall teaching this class has changed based on the knowledge that I've been collecting. So this has been again, a very useful framework. I also, look to Stephen Brookfield's reflective teaching frame as well. And I use that, I incorporate that in my own reflective practice. But I wanted to present this as one option, one thought in terms of our own guided reflection. And next, I want to transition and move into the online engagement framework, because that's how you can see, especially in this reflection part of the model, how I'm using prompts and questions to engage in deeper reflection, more structured reflection that's really guiding my practice. So I want to introduce it. And then at that point, after I introduce it and go through some of the examples of the questions and prompts, I would love to hear from you all. So I promise I'm going to pause in just a few moments, but I first want to introduce the online engagement framework. So this is a depiction of the framework, and some of you may be familiar with it. It was published in a piece that came out in 2018, and the copy of the article is open source, and it's linked in the Wakelet, and I will relink the Wakelet in the chat. It's there if you're interested. The piece in which it's published appears in the online learning journal. So again, it's an open source publication, so you can check it out. There's also a follow-up that I'm a co-author on that I have provided as well in the Wakelet. So it's actually a piece that describes like the use of this framework, and it looks at it from a couple of different contexts, both geographically, so looking at Australian educators and American educators, and also looking at it in different types of courses and different disciplines. So hopefully you'll find that to be useful as well. But what I love about this online engagement framework is that within it, if you look at it, it's not just good for online teaching and learning, but it actually has a lot of application in a blended learning environment and even in a face-to-face learning environment. Because when we think about engagement, there's so many dimensions of it. But what I love about this is that these elements of engagement resonate. These are the things that I want students to do to demonstrate when they are engaged in my courses, whether I'm teaching online, fully, online partially, or in an on the ground or AKA face-to-face environment. I want students to demonstrate social engagement, and I'll explain what all of these are in a moment. Cognitive engagement, behavioral engagement, collaborative engagement, and emotional engagement. So for me, just even looking at the framework and adopting the elements into my own practice as I think about engagement has been incredibly helpful. And then thinking too, like breaking it down even further, guiding my own reflection around my teaching practices using these elements has been very helpful. So it's helped me again to kind of rethink the ways in which I'm engaging my students, because I'm thinking of engagement in broader terms. So thinking of it not just in discussion board posts or turning in assignments, but how am I designing my courses to really foster social engagement, to foster behavioral engagement, to foster collaboration and emotional engagement and cognitive engagement. So it's really changed the ways in which I approach the design and delivery of all of my classes, and especially my online courses, and blended as well. So if you look at the article, it will give you a definition of each of these elements of engagement. But what I have on the following slides, and this is in the handout that's linked in the Wakelet, is the element and then a summary of the definition. So this is like at the heart of the definition. And then on the right-hand side are reflective questions. So these are the questions that I helped to author that, well, I wrote most of these that speak to these elements and that I use in my own professional practice. As I'm going through John's model of reflection and I'm in the reflection process, I'm literally, going through this, but even before I teach my classes, I'm going through my syllabus. I'm looking at my assignments and activities to make sure that I'm really fostering engagement in all of these different areas. So using the online engagement framework. So social engagement, we're looking at social connectedness. So in an online environment, this can look different depending on how you teach your online courses. There may be spaces for students to connect informally with each other. You may have some open discussion boards, or you may have open spaces, water cooler, they used to be called, spaces where students could make connections to each other. One of the things that I do in my own online courses is to have LinkedIn groups so that students can stay connected both while they're in class, and also later on, they can connect with each other and connect with other students who've taken my classes. So I have different LinkedIn groups, which provide too some spaces for social connection. But the reflective questions associated with this have to do with the sense of community. And that can occur in many different ways in our online courses. But thinking about how we're designing for belonging and community. And we can do that in discussion boards, we can do that in open spaces, we can do that just in the design of the assignments themselves. But also, and a little bit more deeply, we have to think about how we establish trust and safety in our courses. And how do we know that what we're doing to establish trust, for example, is effective? So how are we measuring that, or how are we taking getting some sense of that, taking the temperature, quote unquote, to see, whether or not we're effective in that particular area. So I don't want us to answer these questions now, but I want to present again the elements and the reflective questions for you all to consider, and then have some discussion around that. But I invite your questions if you have any now, or comments about what I'm sharing. Please feel free to put those in the chat, or let us know if you'd like to speak about them. And you are welcome to come off of mute and come on camera if you wish to. For cognitive engagement, this is, one of the most traditional elements, I think, in any course, but especially in our online courses, we're thinking a lot about, how students are learning and applying their learning in our courses. And there's a lot of ways that we can measure the demonstration of that. They're turning in assignments, they're engaged in discussion board posts to demonstrate their learning. There are other sorts of activities too that we can monitor. But it's also important in this framework. It speaks to the ability to complete complex tasks and to master skills. And I think the mastery of skills is important because when we think about student success, some of the skills and behaviors that students learn in our classes can and should be transferred to other courses they're taking, both in the same semester, but also down the line. So I think that for me, I've been thinking a lot about that. In the courses that I teach, students have an opportunity to learn APA formatting. And it's sometimes a sticky point for them because they may be many years removed from taking a course in which they had used, a formal citation process like APA or MLA. They may have never used APA, may have been years since they used MLA. They may really not know what to do or how to even approach citation. So for me, it's been important to give them an opportunity to practice and to learn it because it's not a skill that's absolutely essential in my course. However, my students have to write a capstone paper. They have to do a thesis essentially for their program that they're in. And they'll be doing that, for many of them a year after they take my class, but for some of them it's more immediate. So they have an opportunity to learn and to get feedback. And so for that reason, I give them an opportunity to practice APA. So I'm not grading off, quote unquote, because that's not really where I want the rigor to be in my course. But instead, I'm giving them feedback on that, a little bit of feedback and lots of resources. So that way they have an opportunity to learn and then to practice if they want to. They can reformat and I can give them more feedback, or they can go to the Writing Center and the virtual tutoring that's available to them. But in this area, I'm asking myself about, the alignment of the content and the tasks, and how I'm inviting students to be engaged and to demonstrate critical thinking and learning. And I think that obviously those are all very important and things that are at the forefront of our minds often as instructors in online courses or blended courses or any course. But I'm also thinking about how I'm inviting students to activate their metacognition. So how is it that they are turning on those metacognitive thinking and learning skills? And what evidence do I have that students are actually practicing metacognition? So thinking deeply and making connections between information and ideas, or practicing interleaving or retrieval practice. So there are a lot of ways that I can structure assignments and activities so that students are doing that or reflecting on it and reporting back on what they're doing. And then how am I inviting students to demonstrate that they can integrate ideas? Because I know that that skill is essential moving forward, because it shows some mastery of learning, and that's how they're going to apply the ideas, obviously, in the next course, but also eventually in their own professional practice. And then how can they demonstrate those deep disciplinary learnings and understandings? And I have a theory to practice paper in which I have students doing that. And many of them tell me that's the most difficult assignment, but also the one that they really, really enjoy. I won't say they enjoy the most. There's another assignment that they tend to enjoy the most, but they really appreciate this one because it pushes them to think about those disciplinary connections and in ways that they may not have done otherwise. For emotional engagement, this is related to the students' feelings and attitudes about learning. And so in this particular area, I'm looking at my course design and thinking about how I'm inviting students to communicate expectations, but also how are the expectations being managed. So I try to do this through a number of different techniques, but I start before the class even begins with a liquid syllabus. So using this particular strategy has been very helpful because students are clear about what the expectations are, both what I expect, but also what they can expect of me. And I invite them to share their expectations about the course as well during the first week of classes. So that's been a good way to really begin to communicate expectations and to manage them on both ends. And then also helping students to connect their motivation and commitment for what they're learning in the course. I teach courses that are required for students, and some of them are not necessarily courses that they would elect to take on their own because maybe they're not of interest to them. One of the courses that I teach is student development theory. And oftentimes it's a bit of a scary class, if you haven't had psychology courses previously, or if that's not really your thing. But for most of them, they can find some value in it, but they have to really think about, what is my motivation besides the fact that this course is required? Why am I here? What do I hope to gain from it? And during the first week, I invite them to do that, to tell me what this is good for, how they're going to use the information. They don't have to give an exact answer, but to give me some sense of it so that they're thinking along those lines. And I know it's a required class, but we want it to be more meaningful and impactful than just fulfilling a requirement. Although I know that's important, but I'm hopeful that they're thinking about how they can use the course and really make a commitment to learning the information. The next element is behavioral engagement. And this is where we communicate and adhere to the rules and norms. This is where students are actively involved in activities, things that we find are foundational to their success, both within our courses and throughout their academic experience. So for many of us who teach online, these are the kinds of things that, we would consider sort of our online learning sort of baseline. So if students are able to post in a timely fashion and, manage their time, uh, these are sort of indicators that they have the behaviors and the disposition to be successful in an online course. But I have to also think about, how am I helping students to develop these behaviors and also the skills associated with academic success in an online and learning environment and in my own course. And, what sort of multidisciplinary skills are students developing too? What sorts of skills are they developing that they can use in other disciplines and other settings? What are they learning through the design of my course that communicates the learning norms? So what is it that, I'm doing, and how is that being upheld in the online and learning environment? And in what ways are students encouraged to support their peers within the context of the course? So how am I engaging them with each other so they can demonstrate those behaviors again that are essential to success in an online learning environment? So when I think about my own courses, I have lots of opportunities for students to encourage and support each other. So posting, you know, in the discussion boards, commenting on each other's posts. But probably one of the more foundational and sort of simple exercises that I incorporate both at the undergraduate and graduate level is to have students serve as discussion leaders. So this is how they can develop some agency and also have an opportunity to be supportive of each other. And it helps again to communicate sort of the online learning norms, the sort of etiquette and engagement that I want to see in a learning environment, an online learning environment. The students, become an expert. I work with them. They become an expert in a topic based on the weekly modules. So they choose one of them and I work with them over a period of a couple of weeks. Then they post discussion questions, starter discussion questions, and facilitate some discussion. And there are multiple discussion leaders during each week. And again, I work with each of them behind the scenes and then also during the week to help moderate some discussion. And it's generally a pretty fairly seamless process. There's a little bit of, workload, obviously, and the work that has to be done to prepare the students. But usually the students, really take a lot of responsibility and a lot of pride in the work that they're doing. So it helps them, but it also models, what the discussion boards can and should be and how we should engage with each other and be supportive of each other in that online learning environment. And probably this is a technique and an approach that many of you all have used, but it certainly for me reflects this kind of behavioral engagement that I would sort of want to see not only in online courses, but to replicate, in blended courses and even in on the ground courses as well. And then we have collaborative engagement. And of course, we know for some that they are in our online courses because they're not geographically close to each other or to our institutions. I teach at Stony Brook, but live in North Carolina now. So I'm not even geographically close to my own institution. But we know that there are many opportunities, obviously, in online environments for students to learn collaboratively. So in my own courses, I'm looking at, where there are opportunities for collaborative learning to occur, either collaborative learning because I've intentionally designed assignments and activities to be collaborative, but also where can I provide opportunities if they're interested in collaborating with each other? Where could there be options for them to complete assignments or activities collaboratively? And I do teach some classes where students know each other, not in the student development theory class because that's usually the first one they take, but I teach other courses where students sometimes know others in the program and will want to collaborate. And so I do provide opportunities for them to complete assignments or activities collaboratively if they wish. So I'm always searching for those. And then at the same time, collaborative engagement also includes, connections to me too. So how am I helping them to make connections with each other, make connections with me, and then connecting with their networks. So thinking about how within the context of my courses, we can make those connections again to each other, to the networks that we would like to be a part of. So maybe our disciplinary networks, our professional networks, institutional networks, all of this, kind of falls under this collaborative engagement umbrella. What I want to do now is to pause here because I've said a lot, and I would really love to hear from you all about the questions that you might have, thoughts, reactions to either the online engagement elements, the questions that I've shared, the reflective questions that I use, the model that I presented earlier. So what is it that's sort of bubbling up? What questions do you have, comments, thoughts? Are there things that you've done and used in your own reflective practice to guide your reflective practice that you would like to share? We would love to hear that too.
You can unmute yourself, or if you prefer to post a question in the chat, either way is fine, right, Stephanie?
Absolutely. Thank you, Greg. And if it's helpful, I can also go back to another slide, an earlier slide. We can review some things together.
Well, Stephanie, I'm just going to throw something out there to maybe get a discussion going, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So I just happen in this term, I'm an instructional designer. I just happen to be in this term doing quite a few STEM courses, mostly in the math department. And I'm just wondering, do you think STEM type courses can use these types of models? Or do you have any experience using these models in STEM courses? Because my background, I'm a computer science grad, and let's just face it, sometimes we're not the most sociable people. And we just want to sit in front of a computer and program. And so I'm just kind of curious, what your experience has been in those types of disciplines.
Oh, sure. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it. And I should start with Some of my favorite people in the world are STEM affiliated, so in the STEM disciplines. Some of my closest friends and colleagues. I am not obviously in a STEM discipline. I've already shared some of the courses that I teach and have taught. So those you could probably gather are not STEM courses. I have, though, done quite a lot of research on humanizing STEM courses. And it's not exactly the same as this, but a lot of the approaches that I've described that have resulted from the kinds of reflective questions that I've asked related to those elements of engagement um, have been applied in course redesign in STEM. And I can share in the chat in a moment, and I can add it to the Wakelet, a couple of things that I've written on this topic that I've co-authored on this topic, specifically related to STEM. So if you're interested, I mean, I'm happy to talk about those further, but there are a lot of things that can be applied in STEM courses, even large lecture-based STEM courses. One of the articles that I'll share is STEM educators. There's another one about biology specifically. I don't have one on computer science yet, but maybe in the future. But I do think the answer is yes. And there are a lot of folks who have done this work. There have been challenges, but a lot of successes as well.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. And maybe there's some other STEM folks in the virtual space who would like to speak about what they've done.
This may be the after lunch. They haven't had their afternoon coffee session, Stephanie.
I think so. I think so.
So any questions for Stephanie? Either unmute or welcome to put something in chat, either way. Stephanie, do you have any more content to deliver, or are you pretty much at the end of the presentation? You're on mute on my side, Stephanie, if you're still there.
I am. I'm just having a bit of coffee.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Can I say something? Sorry, Stephanie. Hi,
Absolutely.
can you hear me? Yeah. Hi, my name is Anastasia. I work as a researcher in educational technology at Toronto Metropolitan University. My background is social sciences, sociology of education specifically, and I was thrown into the field by finding a job in that field. And listening to you, and again, with the emphasis on learning, online learning, listening to you, to other people today and yesterday, one thing that struck me and that hasn't come up in presentations yet is that effectively what we are talking about today and yesterday is about, it's not so much about learning engagement or a learning experience. I think it's the experiences of learners as users of the technology we provide. Not the technology so much, of the learning through the technology as a medium. And uh, because it's online, one thing we tend to overemphasize is technology and the limitations that arise through technology. But having listened to your presentation, Stefan, and other presentations today and yesterday, it's really interesting that beyond technology, we try to incorporate principles related to social justice through the learning into the computer and so on. And I'm not sure if it sort of fits with the framework. It definitely fits with the reflecting part, but I think that it's definitely a praise to everybody who's involved in designing of online lessons to try to accomplish this, because it's something very difficult to do, even in a classroom-based context, to accommodate everybody's needs, everybody's wishes, everybody's difference. It's a very challenging thing to do in person, so more so online. So, yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Anastasia, and I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm getting over a cold, so I
okay.
apologize.
That's all
I'll
right.
stay off camera, but I wanted to just acknowledge and appreciate your comments. And I think that what I've learned is I know I can't accommodate everyone in my courses, but I
Yeah.
do know that through the use of technology and through the learning design, that I can accommodate many more students and
Mm.
meet them where they are. And so I am trying to be very mindful of that in the online courses I teach, in the
Yeah.
blended courses, and even in courses that I've taught on the ground. So using the technology to also, provide a more equitable learning experience
Mhm.
for students who are taking completely face-to-face courses. But I found that, through the use of some of the technology, that I've been able to do that too, which has been really exciting, I think.
Oh,
So
yes. Yeah.
yeah, I always encourage, all of my colleagues to consider how they can do that too, in their own courses, because it's been empowering,
Yeah.
for the students and also for me as well as an instructor.
Yeah. Thank you.
Stephanie, do you mind if I say something?
Oh no, please go right ahead.
So I'm not sure this is going down the same road as Anastasia was just going down, but I think I think sure we are going to blame COVID for something again, but I think COVID really raised the eyebrows of people when, we all of a sudden had to quickly move a lot of our courses online, right, to accommodate students. And I think we kind of always knew this, but it really became crystal clear that, hey, not all students, not in all geographic areas have the same access to technology, right? Or the types of technology that might be needed to even take an online course. And so I think that's something that both instructional designers, the universities, the instructors are having to recognize when they do an online course. They probably need to be aware of the technology that a student either has or doesn't have in order to even participate in a course. And Anastasia, I don't know if that's was down the same road as you were going, or if I'm way off track.
Yes and no. Like, one thing is the technology. Obviously, in metropolitan areas, the internet coverage is very good, but I understand like there's lots of distance students, where like there's computer problems, technical issues, there is coverage problems, and so on. So, but also, let's say if somebody has full access and has a learning difficulty like dyslexia, and there is no thought in the online lessons about this issue, right? Or the attention span, or like it's beyond the technological part. It's the user experience beyond the technology. It's not only about how the screen looks, if the lesson is divided in sort of chunk bite sizes and everything. It's also accommodating personal needs, health needs as much as possible. Because like, I don't know here, over there, but here in Canada, accessibility, it's a requirement, but it's something that refers to mostly physical disability, where learning difficulties like dyslexia, I'm not so sure they are so much incorporated. Like, for example, I know specifically that people with dyslexic fonts, the best font to use would be Arial, or do not use Times New Roman, for example. Just this simple thing can make a difference, right? But then again, we go beyond that. We go to language and linguistic differences and so on, and just trying to accommodate everything. I mean, it's very difficult to do. And it's a praise to all of you who are involved in instructional design, because you're doing a fantastic job, I think.
Thank you for that additional information.
Yeah.
Stephanie, we have just a few more minutes left, and so I don't know if there's
Yes.
any closing comments that you would like to make.
Well, I just want to thank all of you again for your time and attention, and for the thoughtful questions. Anastasia, thank you. We appreciate that. I've included my contact information at the end of the presentation. So if you're interested in talking more about the use of the framework, or about the reflective questions, or about guided structured reflection, I would be very happy to talk about that. I would love to hear what you all are doing as well. So please feel free to share, and I will add the article that I put in the chat to the Wakelet. So if you're interested in those humanizing STEM approaches, then you can check that out. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. And again, sorry about the coughing spell, but thanks for hanging with me.
Thank you, Stephanie. This was a recorded session, so you will be able to get access to that on the YouTube channel that we have. We're getting them up there pretty quickly, so I would anticipate maybe within 24 to 48 hours, this would be up there if you want to listen to it again. So Stephanie, thank you for participating in the conference and taking the time to put this presentation together. For the people who participated, thank you, and we hope you're enjoying the conference. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you.